Who really was the first emperor of Rome? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes to life and every video immerses you in the destinies of those who shaped the world. Today, prepare to turn back the tide of fate to when a faltering republic faded before the brilliance of a nascent empire. Follow the footsteps of Octavian, the heir to an immortal name, who became Augustus. From the hills of the Palatine to the splendor of the Curia, his rise etched a fiery path between civil war and renewed peace. An unyielding strategist, a visionary politician, he transformed the ruins of power into an imperial order destined to last for centuries. Between betrayals, secret alliances, and promises of greatness, he embodied the renewal of a breathless Rome. For 2,000 years, his shadow still looms over empires. But what do we really know about the man behind the mask of power? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and happy journey. In the last decades, before and after the year 60, the known world experienced a period of intense political, economic, and cultural changes. At the heart of this vast ensemble, the Mediterranean emerged as an essential crossroads, connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia through burgeoning trade networks. While the Roman Empire was not yet officially established, the Roman Republic was already in decline, threatened by looming civil wars. Across the sea to the east, the Ptolemaic Egypt, under the grip of the dynasty, descended from the generals of Alexander the Great, struggled to maintain itself, while other Hellenistic kingdoms persisted. They no longer possessed the power of yore, but continued to perpetuate the Greek cultural traditions inherited from previous periods. To the northeast, the Parthian Empire, under the reign of King Orodes II, posed a serious rival to Rome, holding the reins of the famed Silk Road and thereby monopolizing a crucial portion of trade with the distant Orient. Further south in Africa, Numidia had already been gradually integrated into the Roman sphere of influence, while the kingdom of Meroe in Upper Egypt remained relatively autonomous and flourishing. In the more northern realms of Europe, Celtic and Germanic peoples were organizing into loosely centralized confederations, while in Asia, India, and China were governed by dynasties capable of maintaining grand projects and vast trade routes. Finally, beyond the seas and oceans, the Americas witnessed the early developments of major civilizations such as Teotihuacan in Mexico, while in the Andean region, the precursors of pre-Moche cultures were being put in place. All these territories were already linked, more indirectly than often imagined, by long trade routes that transported precious materials, ideas, and innovations, circulating Baltic amber, Chinese silk, and Indian spices to Mediterranean markets. In the western part of this Mediterranean, the Roman Republic then presented itself as a vast entity extending across the Italian peninsula and many neighboring regions. For several centuries, Rome had managed to dominate most of Italy and then impose itself on various territories such as Sicily, North Africa, by incorporating former Carthaginian possessions, the Iberian Peninsula, and large portions of southern Gaul. This rapid expansion, initiated in the 3rd and 2nd centuries before Christ, was made possible by a complex political system where the popular will, represented by the assemblies, coexisted with the power of the Senate, the organ of an aristocratic elite jealous of its prerogatives. However, by 60, deep weaknesses began to emerge. Since the end of the Punic Wars, a massive influx of wealth and slaves had destabilized rural and urban structures. The arrival of triumphant generals, such as Pompey or Lucullus, also bolstered the pride of certain military figures turned influential politicians. The Republican institutions, soon weakened by rivalries and personal ambitions, heralded a major internal crisis. Popular uprisings and increasingly violent conflicts among senatorial factions raised the alarm. the Republic wavered, and in the ensuing years, the emergence of charismatic leaders like Julius Caesar would hasten the upheavals and ultimately lead to the end of the Republican regime. To the east of this Roman border, the eastern Mediterranean continues its own history, inherited from the epic of Alexander the Great, who had conquered, in the 4th century before Christ, an empire stretching from Greece to the Indus. Once Alexander's empire fractured, several Macedonian or Greek dynasties divided the Near East, Anatolia, Egypt, and founded various so-called Hellenistic monarchies. In the 1st century before Christ, the most emblematic of these dynasties remains that of the Ptolemies, settled in Egypt, around 60. Before Christ, internal tensions are already tearing apart the Ptolemaic court, but among its members is a particular figure destined to mark the collective imagination, the young Cleopatra VII, future queen. She is about to reign in the unstable context of a kingdom weakened by its own dynastic quarrels, financially dependent on Rome, and situated in a strategically essential position for Mediterranean trade. In other regions of the East, notably Syria, Phoenicia, or Judea, local dynasties more or less linked to Greek influence persist, maintaining a very rich cultural mix where the Greek heritage sometimes merges with local traditions. Although often vassalized or allied to Rome, these territories maintain a certain degree of autonomy, modulated by Roman interests and interventions. Not far from these residual Hellenistic kingdoms, the Parthian power constitutes one of the most serious counterweights to Roman expansion. This empire, which developed from Persia, then covers a large part of the Iranian plateau and extends to Mesopotamia, on the banks of the Euphrates. Under Orodes II, the Parthians have consolidated their military and political strength over territories rich in resources and strategically positioned. They control a significant portion of the famous Silk Road, that dense network of trails and caravan cities connecting China to the Mediterranean. This road brings not only highly coveted silk, but also precious metals, exotic plants, and religious and philosophical ideas. The Parthians know how to take advantage of this commercial flow by taxing the passage of merchants and maintaining good relations with neighboring peoples, sometimes hostile to Rome. Consequently, the Parthian Empire asserts itself as a constant military rival. During this period, the two great powers vie for influence in Armenia and other peripheral regions. Battles, like the one that cost the Roman general Crassus his life at Carrhae in 53 before Christ, perfectly illustrate the latent tension between Rome and the Parthians and highlight that in the East, no one has yet secured total supremacy. In Africa, south of the Mediterranean, two major entities particularly draw attention. The first is Numidia, once an important kingdom of North Africa, which successively supported or fought Rome depending on the epochs. After the fall of Carthage in 146, before Christ, Numidian territories fragmented, and Rome took advantage of internal divisions to place allied kings at the head of these regions. By around 60. Before Christ, Numidia is largely under Roman control, or further integrated into the emerging Roman order, serving as a buffer zone against other African peoples. The second notable entity is the Kingdom of Meroe, located along the Upper Nile in Nubia, that is, far south of Egypt. Already renowned for its iron craftsmanship, characteristic temples, and pyramids, Meroe is relatively isolated from the major conflicts between Rome and its neighbors. However, this region is far from being cut off from exchanges, as caravans also travel the routes leading to the Red Sea, while the Nile serves as a backbone for local trade. Thus, despite the distance, the Kingdom of Meroe, marked by its own culture and script, remains in contact with the Mediterranean world through Egyptian or Greek navigators and merchants. During this time, Northern Europe is organizing itself without an imperial structure in the proper sense. Among the most notable peoples are the Celts, established for several centuries in a vast area ranging from the Iberian Peninsula to the British Isles, through Gaul and even parts of Central Europe. The Celts, very diverse, generally group themselves into tribes, each with its own cultural, linguistic, and religious particularities. Druidism, for example, is a fascinating aspect. East of the Rhine, the Germans are found, divided into multiple confederations, some of which, like the Suevi, move across large territories. The Romans, still not very present in these regions, nevertheless show concern for securing their borders to protect against Germanic incursions. Other peoples, further north or east, federate according to ethnic or military affinities, but do not yet form stable political entities. Thus, Europe outside the Roman sphere remains a mosaic of tribes and confederations, a relatively autonomous space where local customs evolve without the direct influence of a centralized state. In India, during the 1st century before Christ and Anno Domini, great changes are afoot. The Shunga dynasty, arising from the overthrow of the Maurya Empire, is in full decline. The Shunga rulers, despite their attempts to maintain unity from the Ganges to the edges of the subcontinent, see their authority challenged by other emerging powers. Among these, the Satavahana dynasty, which governs the Deccan region, advances and consolidates its positions. India's trade exchanges with the rest of Asia and the Mediterranean world continue to grow. Spices, pepper, ivory, and precious fabrics circulate by land and sea, crossing the Indian Ocean to reach the Arabian Peninsula and Ptolemaic Egypt, where Greek and Roman merchants resell them at high prices. This strong international demand for India's exotic products helps enrich all the great powers that tax or protect the trade routes. Religious and cultural influences, notably Buddhism, also begin their expansion westward and into Southeast Asia. Thus, there is significant dynamism, with currents of ideas and goods traversing the Oman Sea and the Persian Gulf, sometimes reaching Nabatean ports, sometimes the eastern commercial terminals of the Parthian Empire. Further east, China is then governed by the Western Han Dynasty. Emperors Xuan, then Cheng, reigned during the period roughly extending from the middle to the last third of the 1st century before Christ. The work of the Han Dynasty is to reinforce imperial authority and develop large infrastructures intended to unify the territories. Internal roads and canals are dug to tax, transport, and secure wealth. The figure of the general and explorer Zhang Qian, who had lived a century earlier in the 2nd century before Christ, remains fundamental. His expeditions initiated the opening of the Silk Road from the Yellow River Valley to Central Asia. Although in Emperor Cheng's time Chinese caravans do not travel directly to the Mediterranean basin, they nevertheless reach relay points controlled by the Parthians or other intermediate peoples. Thus, silk makes its way in stages into the hands of Greek or Roman merchants, marveled by this luxurious fabric. The Han, proud of their civilization, combine the Confucian heritage with an efficient imperial bureaucracy. This political and economic solidity allows China to export not only its products, but also its reputation as a refined civilization. On the American continent, although disconnected from the Old World, we can observe the emergence of urban and religious centers around the 1st century before Christ that would lay the foundations for the classic pre-Columbian civilizations. In the region of present-day central Mexico, the city of Teotihuacan, still in its infancy, begins to attract populations from surrounding villages. Over the decades, Teotihuacan will develop into one of the largest urban centers in Mesoamerica, with its monumental pyramids, residential neighborhoods, and considerable religious influence. In the Andes, the pre-Moche period shows the first signs of a more advanced political and cultural organization, such as ceremonial buildings, elaborate pottery, and perfected agricultural techniques through irrigation. Even though there is no direct contact between these American societies and those of Eurasia at this time, each evolves in parallel, reflecting human creativity and the ability to organize advanced collective structures in varied environments. Within this vast tableau, despite the distances, there already exists a certain network of routes and crossings that connect the continents. Amber from the northern forests of the Baltic travels by land to Central Europe, exchanged or sold at Gallic or Germanic fairs, sometimes ending up in Mediterranean markets. Similarly, spices from India, such as pepper, cinnamon, and various resins, are part of an increasingly lucrative trade. Caravans leave the major ports of India's west coast, cross the Red Sea, or skirt the Arabian Peninsula to unload these exotic goods in port cities under Nabatean or Egyptian control. Chinese silk mainly follows the famous land route through Central Asia, passing from hand to hand among Sogdian, Parthian, and other merchants, before being transported to Antioch, Alexandria, or Rome. At the confluence of these different axes, the Arabian Desert plays a pivotal role as a vast geographical barrier, either circumvented or traversed by routes frequented for centuries, dotted with strategic oases. In this context, the Nabatean ports of Petra and Ayla, located at present-day Aqaba in Jordan, particularly stand out as key hubs of caravan trade. The Nabateans, a people adapted to the desert's harshness, capitalize on these flows. In their cities, water is channeled and stored, providing essential logistical bases for traders laden with precious goods. Petra, the Rose City, nestled among rocks, is then a cosmopolitan center where caravans from Arabia and Greek or Egyptian merchants, all drawn by the prospect of profits from the trade of incense, aromatics, and other rare products, can be found. From 91 to 44. Before Christ, the Roman Republic goes through one of the most delicate phases of its history, marked by a series of internal wars and political rivalries that will gradually lead it toward its twilight. During this period, several leading figures emerge and impose their influence on public life, while bloody conflicts shake Italy and the Allied provinces. The Republican institutions, already weakened by corruption and clientelism, gradually falter under the effect of personal ambitions and civic uprisings. This chronological sequence, which begins with the social wars and ends with the assassination of Julius Caesar during the Ides of March in 44 before Christ, constitutes a turning point in Rome's evolution from republic to empire. The social wars, which break out from 91 before Christ, pit Rome against its Italian allies, called Socii, from which the Latin name Bellum Sociale is derived. Since the progressive conquest of the Italian peninsula, these peoples were bound to Rome by treaties of submission or alliance. In exchange for troops and resources, they enjoyed relative autonomy, but remained excluded from Roman citizenship, which conferred essential political privileges. A large part of the allies, particularly the Marsi, the Samnites, and other mountain peoples, began to demand a form of civic equality. The Roman Senate, resistant to any dilution of the electorate, is slow to grant citizenship to all Italians. This slowness provokes frustration and revolts. Encouraged by the tribune Marcus Livius Drusus, who unsuccessfully attempted to extend citizenship, the allies take up arms. Combats are particularly violent in southern Italy. Although the outcome of the war is uncertain at first, Rome eventually prevails due to the superiority of an army now federating seasoned legions. However, to quell the uprisings, the Senate finally consents to grant citizenship to most of the loyal or defeated allies, making this war politically contradictory, Rome fights militarily to refuse a right that it ends up conceding in urgency. In the aftermath of this conflict, Roman political life further deteriorates. Rivalries between factions within the Senate, mainly between the populars who claim the support of the popular assemblies and the optimates who defend senatorial authority, intensify. Among the populares, the general Caius Marius, hero of the war against the Cimbri and the Teutons, stands out as a champion of reforms and the popular cause. He faces off directly against Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an aristocrat and talented military leader supported by patrician circles. The two men vie for command in the east, where King Mithridates VI of Pontus has seriously threatened the Roman provinces in Asia Minor. This opposition turns into a real civil war around 88 before Christi, when Sulla, for the first time in Roman history, dares to march with his army to the capital, imposing his will on the Senate by force. Marius manages to briefly regain control when he enters Rome after Sulla's departure to the east, but he dies shortly after, in 86 before Christi, during his 7th consulship. On his victorious return from Asia, Sulla declares himself dictator in 82 before Christi, instilling terror among his opponents. Once an exceptional tool reserved for major crises, the Roman dictatorship becomes, under his authority, an unprecedented weapon of power, which he uses to launch proscriptions, a public list of enemies of the state whose properties are confiscated and who can be executed without trial. Through this radical method, thousands of citizens are eliminated or forced into exile, and Sulla reorganizes the Republic according to his conservative vision. He strengthens senatorial power by limiting the authority of the tribunes of the plebs, once a crucial counterbalance. After achieving his political goals, he voluntarily abdicates the dictatorship in 79 before Christi, astonishing his contemporaries. Although he withdraws from public life shortly before his death, his example sets a dangerous precedent. He proves that a victorious general can seize institutions and manipulate them at will, only to retire, as if he had performed merely a dramatic episode. In the wake of these conflicts, the Republic remains exhausted and divided, while the phenomenon of clientelism grows increasingly significant. Now, citizens are more and more dependent on powerful patrons, leading aristocrats, or military leaders capable of ensuring their protection and land. In this context, the figure of Julius Caesar gradually emerges, first as an ambitious young politician from a branch of the Geans, Julia. Born around 100 before Christi, he stands out with a brilliant oratory career and a keen sense of popularity. Quickly, he aligns with the populares and wins the favor of the urban plebs through generous grain distributions and lavish spectacles. He understands the need to secure the loyalty of strong allies, but also of henchmen capable of defending him in the political arena. In 63 before Christi, Caesar attains the position of chief priest, also known as Pontifex Maximus, a highly prestigious religious office that enhances his public image. The thirst for military glory led Caesar to forge an unprecedented alliance with two other prominent figures of the time, Pompey and Crassus, to form what historians call the first triumvirate in 60 before Christ. Pompey, a former lieutenant of Sulla, had already gained his fame by pacifying several provinces, notably during the war against pirates and in the eastern provinces. Crassus, for his part, was renowned for his colossal fortune amassed through real estate speculation and financial maneuvers. The pact between these three men was based on the balance of their mutual interests. They committed to support each other in elections and the sharing of military commands. To strengthen this agreement, Caesar gave his own daughter, Julia, in marriage to Pompey. Galvanized by this financial and political support, he obtained the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyria, to which Transalpine Gaul was added. Starting in 58, before Christ, he launched a vast campaign of conquest that would last until 50,000. before Christ, resulting in the submission of all the Gallic tribes, except for a few rare pockets of resistance. The commentaries on the Gallic War, written by Caesar himself to ensure his own propaganda, detailed his battles against the Helvetii, the Belgae, and the Arverni, led by Vercingetorix. This conquest significantly increased his prestige and wealth as the spoils, captives, and Gallic gold filled his coffers. However, the first triumvirate was hardly harmonious and quickly weakened by personal rivalries and tragic losses. In 54 before Christ, Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter and Pompey's wife, died in childbirth, removing the main family bond between the two men. The following year, Crassus met his end at the Battle of Carrhae in Mesopotamia in 53 before Christ against the Parthians. Crassus had hoped to match Caesar's military glory with an eastern victory, but his crushing defeat, followed by a decimation of his troops, was a geopolitical disaster and an embarrassment for Rome. Without this third pillar, the triumvirate disbanded. From then on, Pompey sought more support from the Senate, while Caesar, still in Gaul, remained overshadowed by his military successes and determined to maintain his authority. The competition turned into confrontation when it became clear that Pompey and the Senate intended to deprive Caesar of his command before he returned to Italy. Eager to prosecute him for various abuses of power in Gaul, the Optimates of the Senate, allied with Pompey, demanded that Caesar lay down his arms. Knowing that his political survival depended on his military strength, he crossed the Rubicon with his legion in January 49 before Christ, a river symbolically marking the boundary of his provincial authority. According to tradition, it was then that he pronounced the famous phrase, "Alea jacta est," meaning the die is cast. This act amounted to declaring civil war, as no general was allowed to enter Italy, armed without Senate permission. Pompey, not having enough legions on Italian soil to offer immediate resistance, retreated to Greece with some senators, preparing a counter-offensive in the east. This new civil war stretched from the plains of Italy to Macedonia, passing through Hispania. Caesar proved to be very dynamic, first crossing the Iberian Peninsula to defeat Pompey's supporters, then quickly turning towards the Balkans. The decisive confrontation took place at the Battle of Pharsalus in Thessaly in 48 before Christ. Although Pompey's troops were more numerous, Caesar capitalized on superior tactical maneuvering and a cohesion forged by years of campaigns to win a resounding victory. Pompey fled to Ptolemaic Egypt, believing he could find refuge with the young king Ptolemy XIII. But the latter, aiming to ingratiate himself with Caesar, had Pompey assassinated upon his landing, offering his head as a trophy to the victor. The act filled Caesar with horror and sorrow, as he feigned indignation and refused to condone the murder. The subsequent events, although they also concerned the Egyptian situation and Cleopatra, definitively established Caesar's military and political superiority over the Senate. Caesar, having returned to Rome in triumph after resolving several matters in the East, has measures voted that further increase his power. He is appointed dictator for extended terms, then dictator for life in 44 before Christ under the title Dictator Perpetuo, a title that transposes into public law the concentration of all republican prerogatives onto a single person. Under his rule, Roman institutions undergo profound remodeling. For instance, he grants citizenship to various provincial groups to ensure their loyalty, reforms the calendar by introducing the Julian calendar to correct the astronomical misalignment that had accumulated over the years, and initiates major urban planning projects. Similarly, he introduces numerous senators of his choice, diluting the old aristocracy within a Senate that is now much larger. These centralizing policies, directed by a single authority, are accompanied by largesse and amnesties towards some former enemies, rendering Caesar's position ambivalent. He appears both as an enlightened reformer and as a de facto monarch, trampling on the republican ideals based on collegiality and the rotation of magistracies. For many senators, Caesar's lifetime dictatorship, his desire to reinstall a quasi-monarchical order, and his personal reforms constitute an intolerable drift, reminiscent of the tyranny of Tarquin the Proud, the last king of Rome, overthrown 5 centuries earlier. A conspiracy forms among men of senatorial rank, including Marcus Junius Brutus and Caius Cassius Longinus. Brutus, often depicted in historiography as the spiritual heir of the founders of the Republic, has distant familial ties with Caesar, who had nevertheless showered him with honors. Cassius, more of a military man, harbors a tenacious grudge against the dictator. The conspirators convince themselves that they must put an end to this dictatorship and save the last semblances of republican liberty. For them, only the removal of Caesar could allow a return to the traditional functioning of the city. The fateful date is set for the Ides of March, the day of a Senate session, March 15th, 44 before Christ. At dawn of this day, various omens are recounted in ancient sources, although their authenticity is questionable. It is said that Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, dreamed of her husband's murder and begged him not to go to the Senate. The soothsayers, too, reportedly spoke of bad omens. Caesar, however, proceeds to the Curia of Pompey, where the assembly is held. The conspirators surround him under the pretense of presenting him with a petition. Suddenly, they draw their daggers and stab him repeatedly. According to some sources, the dictator uttered the famous phrase, tu quoque, fili me, which means you too, my son, addressing Brutus, although modern historians debate the authenticity of these words. He dies stretched out at the foot of Pompey's statue, an ironic symbol of the fate he had himself inflicted on his rival. The shock is immense in Rome. The conspirators, hoping to be hailed as liberators of the Republic, quickly realized that the majority of the population, especially the popular classes, who appreciated Caesar's reforms, do not welcome this event enthusiastically. Far from achieving a restoration of republican balance, they rather provoke an institutional vacuum. Caesar's supporters, identifying as the Caesarian faction, organized to demand vengeance and stigmatize the assassins as traitors. They particularly rely on Mark Antony, one of Caesar's main lieutenants, and on Lepidus, Magister Equitum, which means commander of the cavalry at the time. Initially, a precarious compromise is negotiated to avoid new bloodshed, providing amnesty for the conspirators while legally validating Caesar's recent acts. Mark Antony then delivers a famous funeral oration in the Forum, brandishing the dictator's blood-stained tunic and stirring the crowd's emotions. This theatrical and calculated harangue will tilt the city into an explosive climate, precipitating Rome into new civil wars. Caius Octavius Thurinus, who history will later know as Octavian, was born in the year 63 before Christ in Rome, a city in political upheaval. His family origins are rooted in Velitrae, present-day Velletri, a town in central Italy located southeast of the capital. His family belongs to the equestrian order, a social rank just below the senatorial aristocracy. This order comprises Roman citizens capable of equipping themselves for cavalry when the army demands it. But, during the Republic, it mainly serves as a pool of administrators and businessmen. The father of Caius Octavius, Gaius Octavius Sr., is himself a respected figure in the Roman administration. He has held public office in Macedonia and aimed to expand the family's influence in the capital. The mother of Caius Octavius, Attila, is the niece of Julius Caesar, which immediately places the young boy at the heart of powerful family networks. In 63, before Christ, the Roman Republic is stirred by internal tensions. The very year of Octavian's birth witnesses the famous Catiline conspiracy, in which Senator Lucius Sergius Catilina attempts to overthrow the government. Although this event does not directly concern him, it reflects the instability of a republic already shaken by power struggles and fierce rivalries within the Senate. For many Romans, the political future is uncertain, and the upbringing of young Caius Octavius unfolds amidst internal quarrels, foreshadowing a change of era. Within the family sphere, strategies of alliance are regularly discussed. The kinship with Caesar proves to be a major asset, but no one can yet imagine how far this proximity will lead the child. The first living environment of Octavian is the family home in Rome, but the Octavian family also maintains strong ties to Velitrae. Much of his childhood is likely divided between the city, where he senses the political and cultural fervor, and the countryside of Latium, the cradle of his ancestors. In his early years, he receives a refined education, reflecting the relative ease of his family. Young boys of the equestrian class usually receive training based on mastery of reading, writing, arithmetic, and later develop skills in the art of rhetoric. In Rome, speech is a crucial weapon, whether one speaks in the forum or before a tribunal. Very early on, young Octavian is encouraged to develop an ease in oratory that will serve him well in his later political roles. During his childhood, Octavian already mingles with those who will become loyal companions and political supporters. Among them, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, a schoolmate, stands out for his tenacity and exceptional strategic mind. Not belonging to a prestigious lineage, Agrippa is nonetheless destined for a great future alongside Octavian. Another major supporter is Gaius Silnius Maecenas. Although he does not yet appear as the future patron of the arts, Maecenas also comes from a wealthy family, linked to the equestrian and senatorial aristocracy. He reveals, during his studies, a refined intellect and an intellectual proximity with Octavian. Over the years, these two companions will become the pillars of Octavian's entourage and will help him build an image of peace and stability after the turmoils at the end of the Republic. The training of Caius Octavius includes the acquisition of traditional Roman virtues, often summarized under the term mores maiorum, which refers to family piety, military courage, honor, and a sense of civic duty. At the time, tutors emphasized reading epics and the speeches of great orators, such as Cicero, whose fame is at its peak. Octavian learns to express himself clearly and to persuade an audience, a skill that goes well beyond pure rhetorical art. It also touches on negotiating ability, choosing alliances, and leading men. For a Roman from an equestrian background, being skilled in this domain constitutes a path of social and political promotion. It is not enough to be related by blood to a great patron like Julius Caesar. One must still rise on one's own by demonstrating initiative and determination. Growing up in the shadow of an influential figure like Caesar, Octavius gradually becomes accustomed to the idea that he is a close relative of the leader of a growing faction. His attachment to Caesar is spectacularly demonstrated in 46 before Christ E, when Caesar embarks on a military campaign in Hispania, the present-day Iberian Peninsula, to quell the last forces loyal to Pompey, his longtime rival. Despite his young age, Octavius, then barely a teenager, is eager to prove his loyalty and courage by joining his uncle on the theater of operations. It is during this period that the episode often recounted by ancient authors occurs. Despite suffering from a severe sprain, Octavius decides to clandestinely cross the Adriatic to join Caesar. This feat testifies to his audacious temperament and his desire to have himself noticed. The accounts tell that he braved storms and prohibitions to make a nocturnal voyage, often narrowly avoiding shipwreck, all for the sole purpose of not disappointing the one he considered his protector and a model to follow. While Julius Caesar holds a central place in young Octavius's imagination, he is not the only possible mentor. Octavius's mother, Atia, zealously oversees his moral and religious education, encouraging him to respect traditions, to be appreciated by his masters, and to take care of his social reputation. The women of the family, though excluded from political office, play a role from the shadows. They arrange marriages, foster alliances, gather confidences, and negotiate protections. In the affluent homes of Rome, this feminine influence greatly contributes to the daily life of a boy like Octavius. They advise him on his associations, train him to respect domestic rights, and teach him how to maintain the dignity of the gens Octavia. As Octavius grows, the Roman political climate becomes increasingly tense. Julius Caesar, already crowned with the glory of his conquests in Gaul from 58 to 50, before Christ, finds himself embroiled in a civil war against Pompey. After decisive victories, notably at Pharsalus in 48 before Christi, he gradually assumes control of the levers of power. The Senate is divided between fervent supporters of the dictator and opponents worried about his rise to power. By the time Caesar obtains the dictatorship for life, no one doubts that he is reshaping the republic according to his ambitions. For Octavius, Caesar's progression has two major implications. On one hand, it reinforces his feeling of being connected to the most powerful man in Rome. On the other, it gives him the opportunity to closely observe the workings of decision-making circles. During these years, the young man learns the games of political strategy. He observes, listens, and becomes familiar with the supporters and adversaries of his illustrious relative. Octavius's destiny takes a sudden turn in 44. Before Christi, when Julius Caesar is assassinated on the Ides of March, precisely March 15th, by a group of conspiratorial senators, including Brutus and Cassius. The shock is immense in Rome, and Octavius, still unknown, realizes that the future will demand his full commitment. It is reported that he is at the time in Illyria, a region covering the eastern coast of the Adriatic, on a mission possibly related to military training, entrusted by Caesar. Upon hearing news of the dictator's death, he must decide whether to return immediately to Rome, despite the dangers, or remain away, waiting to see more clearly. Driven by the desire to preserve his uncle's legacy, Octavius chooses to return to Italy. With a few loyal companions, including Agrippa, he crosses the Adriatic once more, this time to claim his inheritance and assert his place in political life. It is only after arriving on the peninsula that the adolescent becomes aware of Julius Caesar's will. The document unexpectedly stipulates that Octavius, and not Mark Antony or other close associates of Caesar, is to inherit the largest portion of the dictator's fortune, and even his name. Thus, Octavius becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, commonly translated in French as Octavian, solidifying his place in Caesar's lineage. This adoption is termed posthumous, since the act could not take effect during Caesar's lifetime. Nevertheless, under Roman law, it is perfectly legitimate. The riches, client-based influence, and fame associated with Caesar's inheritance now fall into Octavian's hands. This revelation constitutes an earthquake for many Romans, as Mark Antony, another leading lieutenant of the late dictator, was already aiming to wield power. The public reading of the will takes place in an explosive context. Caesar's supporters, shocked and orphaned by their leader, are looking for a new champion. Mark Antony, believing he could position himself as a natural successor, faces unexpected competition, a young man of just 19. For Octavian, the task is immense. He must first gain the trust of the soldiers who remained loyal to Caesar, then get recognized by the Senate, where conservatives see him as a potential threat. Moreover, he must prove that he has the necessary qualities to lead, having never held any magistracies before. The generosity of the Caesarian inheritance, for example, by promising money to veterans and securing land for them, becomes a crucial persuasive tool. Octavian quickly understands that the support of the army will allow him to assert himself in the political fray. His new legal identity, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, greatly enhances his aura. This name change is not insignificant. In Roman culture, a person's name reflects their status and family alliances. He is no longer merely Octavius from the equestrian order. He is now recognized as the adoptive son of the late dictator, bearing the name Julius Caesar. In the eyes of the people, he embodies the continuity of Caesarian power. However, he remains unknown, forcing him to multiply public gestures and speeches to present himself as a worthy bearer of his uncle's political project. In his speech to the troops, he recalls the benefits Caesar granted them and emphasizes that he will honor all financial commitments outlined in the will. Driven by unyielding determination, Octavian thus attempts to rally the Caesarians, hoping to surpass the other claimants to the political inheritance. Beyond the money and the name, the will bequeaths to Octavian a moral task: to avenge the death of Caesar, which his supporters consider a revolting political murder. In Rome of 44, before Christ, the aspiration to punish the assassins of the man whom some already see as a god in the making, Divus Julius, can galvanize many veterans. By bearing Caesar's name, Octavian implicitly receives the mission to restore order and defend the memory of his adoptive father. This ambition, initially dictated by emotion and family solidarity, quickly becomes a political program. The young heir plays on this collective sentiment to rally the old Caesarian guard around him, setting off incessant diplomatic and military negotiations. Each camp, from the Senate to Mark Antony, cautiously gauges the potential of a teenager who lacks neither will nor strategic intelligence. Octavian's initial supporters are focused in his close circle. Marcus Agrippa, a childhood friend and ingenious spirit, understands the necessity of organizing solid armed forces. Having already proven his reliability during previous military campaigns, he suggests methods to Octavian for attracting Caesar's veterans. On the other hand, Maecenas demonstrates an exceptional diplomatic talent. Although not yet the great patron of the arts that history will later reveal, he proves to be a skillful negotiator, capable of convincing certain senators, thus rekindling ties broken by the Civil War. While the memory of Caesar remains omnipresent in people's minds, the small team around Octavian banks on this invaluable, symbolic capital to organize meetings and gatherings in patrician villas, public squares, and legionary camps. Despite his young age, Octavian does not hesitate to demonstrate seriousness and firmness. He knows he must overcome the skepticism of the elites, who see him as an unknown, and also overcome the declared hostility of Mark Antony, who considered himself the rightful heir of Caesar. In his first public appearances, Octavian appears dressed in the toga virilis, the symbolic garment of a Roman adult, and delivers speeches to reassure his intentions. He does not claim to overthrow the Republic, but to save it by punishing the traitors. Although he benefits from the nominal legitimacy transmitted by Caesar, he must still gain tangible political support. His sense of diplomacy suggests not immediately antagonizing the Senate, knowing that institutional support can stabilize his position. The formative years he has just undergone, both in rhetoric school and on the military field, have prepared him for these complex negotiations. In the span of a few months, the young man reveals his sense of political calculation. He maneuvers to formally recognize his adoption while distributing financial rewards to sometimes indecisive troops. He skillfully uses his relationship with Caesar to solicit popular affection. Ordinary people on the streets of Rome see in Octavian a new face, perhaps less threatening than that of Mark Antony, known for his often unpredictable exploits. The new Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus promises justice under the guise of punishing the conspirators. He also benefits from a certain leniency from moderate personalities, who believe that supporting a young heir who can be influenced is less risky than favoring the turbulent Antony. In this bubbling of alliances, the name Octave is gradually disappearing from discussions in favor of Octavian, already associated with formidable prestige. At the dawn of the end of the year, 44, Octavian clearly expresses his project to honor Caesar's memory and establish his own position. He inherits not only 3/4 of the properties of his illustrious predecessor, but also his moral debt to the people and the army. The monetary gifts promised by Caesar in his will must now be distributed by Octavian. This is a colossal financial challenge, but it is also the best way to buy the loyalty of the legionaries. To achieve this, Octavian undertakes various loans, including from wealthy individuals, and begins selling some inherited properties. At the same time, he multiplies gestures of generosity in the popular districts of Rome, sometimes offering festivities or food distributions. Every denarius spent serves to consolidate the reputation of a young leader, determined to fulfill his uncle's wishes. This sense of strategy and fierce determination already outline the political figure that Octavian will embody in the following decades. Between 63 and 44, he evolves from a well-born but still obscure child to an adolescent heir of a prestigious name and invested with a historic mission. His courage, illustrated by the famous clandestine crossing of the Adriatic despite his injury, attracts the sympathy of the soldiers, who are more sensitive to acts of bravery than purely legal considerations. His education, centered on rhetoric and the observation of political mechanisms, provides him with the intellectual tools to navigate a context of plots and coups. His friendships, forged with brilliant minds like Agrippa and Maecenas, form a solid network ready to support him in future confrontations. Octavian, officially Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, sought recognition as the adoptive son and avenger of Caesar. Mark Antony, strong in his charisma with the troops, attempted to rule Rome. The tension quickly rose. In northern Italy, 2 battles, namely Forum Gallorum and Modena, took place in 43. Forum Gallorum was an ambush where Consul Pansa lost his life. The second consul, Hirtius, managed to repel Antony. Shortly after, the Battle of Modena was equally fierce. Hirtius died, but Antony had to withdraw his forces. Octavian, young but determined, emerged stronger from these confrontations. He then moved closer to Caesar's troops, distributing promises and affirming his legitimacy. The Senate, orphaned of its consuls, hesitated. It feared both Antony and Octavian, but the ambition of the latter found resonance among the Roman people, attached to the name of Caesar. The balance of power was shifting towards a radical recomposition. Without consuls, the Senate no longer had an executive leader. Octavian, skillful, claimed the consulship and secured the support of the legionaries. Mark Antony remained dangerous, but an agreement was reached. Thus was born the Second Triumvirate with Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus. Instituted by the Lex Titia in 43, it granted them a 5-year mandate and unlimited power. Immediately, prescriptions were declared to eliminate opponents. Cicero, the great orator, was the most famous victim. This purge, reminiscent of Sulla, confiscated properties and lands, increasing the wealth of the triumvirs. Any political opponent was threatened. In this atmosphere of terror, Octavian used the recovered fortune to reward the soldiers, while Antony consolidated his military support. Lepidus remained in the background, lacking the stature of a major antagonist. This tripartite government, while ending the anarchy, prepared the way for the ultimate confrontation for control of the Roman world. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius had retreated to the east, recruiting soldiers and collecting taxes in the Asian provinces. Their goal was to restore the Republic by overthrowing the Triumvirate. The inevitable confrontation occurred in 42. Before Christ E at Philippi in Macedonia, the battlefield, divided between hills and marshes, forced each side to operate on 2 fronts. First, Brutus defeated Octavian's legions, who was ill and inexperienced. On the other wing, Antony annihilated Cassius, who committed suicide, believing the situation was hopeless. A few weeks later, a second encounter sealed the fate of the liberators. Defeated, Brutus ended his own life. This victory of the triumvirate legitimized Caesar's vengeance. The victors collected booty and glory, strengthening their supremacy. Henceforth, nothing opposed their domination. Rome had definitively turned the page on militant republicanism. The triumvirs, free to divide the empire, entered into a forced cohabitation while awaiting a new showdown. The Roman world was then divided. Antony received the east, rich with Greek cities and Egypt. Octavian obtained the west and Italy, where he managed the redistribution of land for veterans, a crucial issue for internal peace. Lepidus was relegated to Africa, a remunerative but less prestigious territory. Tensions quickly resurfaced, and Fulvia, Antony's wife, instigated the Perusian War in 41 before Christ E, seeking to counteract Octavian's growing influence. The insurrection failed, and Perugia surrendered, strengthening Octavian's authority over the peninsula. To appease resentments, a familial agreement was negotiated. Antony married Octavia, Octavian's sister, an alliance intended to seal the peace. Yet, the balance remained fragile. Antony, attracted by the east, distanced himself from Rome, while Octavian consolidated his grip on the institutions and assured his popularity with the legions. To assert his power, Octavian also formed matrimonial alliances. First married to Scribonia, he repudiated her in 38, before Christ E, to marry Livia Drusilla, a patrician from the prestigious Claudia gens. Concurrently, he relied on his friend Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, an outstanding strategist who developed Portus Julius, a naval base near Puteoli. With this arsenal, Octavian was able to form a formidable fleet. Italy, now better defended, could face many threats. Meanwhile, Antony strengthened his relationship with Cleopatra VII, Queen of Ptolemaic Egypt. This political and romantic alliance increased his financial and naval resources, giving the East a major role. Their plans included a campaign against the Parthians, while Cleopatra strove to ensure the survival of her dynasty, already tied to Caesar by the birth of young Caesarion. In 34, before Christ E, the donations of Alexandria marked a turning point. Antony allocated various eastern territories to Cleopatra's children, including Caesarion, proclaimed King of Kings and the legitimate son of Caesar. In Rome, the reaction was fierce, and many saw it as a betrayal. Octavian presented himself as Caesar's sole legitimate heir, accusing Antony of wanting to break with Rome. To rally public opinion, Octavian released a purported testament of Antony, where he requested to be buried in Alexandria rather than Rome. The Senate, appalled, stripped Antony of his titles and declared war on Cleopatra. Thus, Octavian obtained the official legitimation of a liberating conflict, according to Roman propaganda. The political and personal rupture was sealed. Two blocs would confront each other for supremacy in the Mediterranean basin. The decisive battle was prepared at Actium in western Greece, where Antony and Cleopatra assembled a massive fleet. Octavian and Agrippa, in turn, had smaller but more maneuverable ships. On September 2nd and 31st, before Christi, the naval clash erupted. Agrippa, a shrewd tactician, sought to cut the enemy's supply lines. Surprised, Antony's crews struggled. Cleopatra, fearing capture, ordered her ships to retreat. Antony, disconcerted, followed her, abandoning his soldiers. Octavian's army eventually seized the victory. Actium became a symbol of supremacy for Octavian, now master of Rome's destiny. This defeat left Antony exhausted, forced to withdraw one last time to Egypt with Cleopatra. In Rome, Octavian brandished this success as the liberation of the people against the Oriental collusion. Retired to Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra still hoped to negotiate, but the outcome was sealed. In 30 before Christ, Octavian launched the final offensive against Egypt. Antony's demoralized forces dispersed. Antony committed suicide, choosing death over captivity. Cleopatra, according to legend, allowed herself to be bitten by an asp, thus avoiding the humiliation of a triumphant parade in Rome. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and Egypt became a Roman province. The victorious Octavian seized the treasury, strengthening his financial position. The Senate acclaimed him, recognizing him as the supreme heir of Caesar. The era of civil wars was coming to an end, leaving Octavian free to reshape the institutions. Henceforth, he appeared as the sole guarantor of peace after so much violence. The Republic was living its last moments, gradually replaced by the personal rule of a future emperor. At the beginning of the year 30 before Christ, Octavian was in a position of strength following the fall of his adversaries, Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII. Alexandria, the sumptuous capital of the defunct Ptolemaic kingdom, fell under his control after the definitive defeat of Antony's armies. Cleopatra, the last sovereign of the Macedonian dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great, initially tried to negotiate her salvation, but faced with Octavian's intransigence and the failure of her last diplomatic maneuvers, she chose suicide over submission. Her act, which became legendary, symbolizes the end of an era in the Eastern Mediterranean. For Octavian, annexing Egypt was not just a strategically crucial move, it was also a foundational gesture for his own power. The Egyptian province would henceforth function as a breadbasket, the regular supply of which would benefit Rome and bolster Octavian's authority. Aware of the unique status of this territory, he placed Egypt under his personal authority. No Roman senator would have the right to enter it without permission, a sign of the great mistrust he harbored towards those likely to challenge his new monopoly. In a republic in transition, possessing a critical grain supply offered a remarkably powerful tool for economic and political control. Once order was restored in Egypt, Octavian returned to Rome in triumph with the aura of an uncontested victor. Keen to deliver a strong message to the Roman population and the political elites, he undertook a highly symbolic gesture, notably the closing of the doors of the Temple of Janus, located in the Forum. In Roman tradition, these doors remained open in times of war and were only closed when peace reigned throughout the empire. For decades, Rome had been plagued by internal and external conflicts. Hence, it was extremely rare to see this temple sealed, an event that occurred only in times of absolute tranquility. The closing of the doors indicated both the end of the civil wars that had ravaged the Republic and the consolidation of Octavian's power. For the population, it was a sign of appeasement. For Octavian, a propaganda act intended to strengthen his image as the guarantor of stability. Buoyed by this climate of reconciliation, Octavian then turned to the Senate, whose members officially remained the first holders of public authority in Rome. Yet, the political reality had changed, and Octavian, bolstered by his military prestige and popular support, intended to impose a new system of government that went beyond the mere restoration of the Republic. Aware of the need to maintain traditions, he carefully calibrated his claims to consolidate his authority without directly affronting senatorial pride. Thus, he gradually received several prestigious titles. He was designated Princeps Senatus, the first of the Senate, which conferred upon him a symbolic precedence and the moral authority to open debates. Subsequently, he was recognized as Imperator Perpetual, a military term that emphasized his command over the armies, traditionally an honor granted to victorious generals, but now conferred by the Senate without a time limit. Moreover, Octavian acquired the tribunicia potestas, or tribunician power, generally associated with the protection of the people. The tribunes of the plebs could, in theory, block any law deemed harmful to the citizens. By amassing this power, Octavian placed himself above all institutional opposition, thus asserting his primacy not only over the Senate, but also over the people. This accumulation of titles, though ostensibly legal and without abrupt rupture, transformed the Republic into a regime where institutions were gradually concentrated in the hands of a single man. In 27 before Christ, Octavian executed one of the most significant political gestures of his career. Indeed, he performed a theatrical transfer of powers between himself and the Senate. According to the account of several ancient historians, the young leader pretended to want to restore the Republic and return to the Senate all the public prerogatives that had concentrated around him. Once before the assembly, he skillfully played the humility card by declaring that he was relinquishing his functions for the good of the state and out of a desire to return to Republican normality. However, this move turned out to be perfectly orchestrated. The senators, surprised or pretending to be, then begged Octavian to retain his role for the safety of the city. After many simulated refusals, he finally agreed, thus finding a moral and institutional justification for the concentration of his power. In reward for his apparent sacrifice, the Senate granted him the cognomen Augustus. This title, derived from the Latin verb augere, which implies to increase or augment, suggests a sacred character and superior prestige. Through this solemn acclamation, he is no longer simply Octavian. He becomes Augustus, a name that will resonate through the centuries to symbolize the new imperial regime. Now bolstered by this new name, Augustus hastened to reform the army to eliminate the risk of new civil wars. The legions, a traditional springboard for individual ambition, were converted into a permanent force under his authority. No longer could a general raise private troops to compete with the prince, and the 28 legions gradually became a stable corps. Each was stationed in a frontier region, now called a military province, intended to prevent invasions and maintain order on the empire's borders. The soldiers, once recruited from all over in times of crisis, now benefited from more regular pay and benefits, reducing the risk of mutiny. This professionalization was accompanied by the creation of the military treasury, or aerarium military, a fund specifically designated for the payment of soldiers' wages and veterans' pensions. Funded notably by taxes on inheritances and sales, the aerarium militare became a central tool for ensuring the loyalty of the troops. It allowed for better regulation of the legionaries' careers and provided a form of economic security to those who completed their service. Thus, Augustus hoped to depoliticize the army and maintain full control over this formidable force. In parallel, Augustus proceeded to an overhaul of the provincial administration, as controlling the vast Mediterranean space required a more efficient and coherent system of governance than that of the old republic. Previously, provincial governors were appointed for 1 year by the Senate, often with vague mandates and limited resources, leading to maladministration and corruption. Augustus innovated by dividing the provinces into 2 categories: senatorial provinces and imperial provinces. The senatorial provinces, considered pacified and with low military risk, remained administered by proconsuls appointed by the Senate. They thus retained a mode of management inherited from republican tradition, even if the prince always exercised a form of discreet oversight. Alongside this, the imperial provinces, often frontier or strategic, were entrusted to legates or prefects who depended directly on Augustus. In practical terms, this division preserved the dignity of the Senate in the management of stable territories, while the military regions, generators of prestige but also real defensive challenges, remained in the hands of the central power. To make this new system work, Augustus strengthened the ranks of the administration by creating a true procuratorial cursus, an ensemble of charges entrusted to Roman Knights members of the Ordo Equester, tasked with overseeing the implementation of local reforms, collecting taxes, and supervising financial flows. This process resembled the beginnings of an imperial bureaucracy, where the loyalty of officials towards Augustus mattered more than the traditional electoral process. To illustrate the care he took in managing his public image, an anecdote known in ancient sources recounts the proposal made to Augustus to offer him a solid gold shield, a symbol of recognition and triumph from various provinces of the empire. It is said that when this offering was presented to him, Augustus, more skillful a propagandist than ever, feigned modesty and declined the precious gift. Instead, he accepted a more modest votive shield to commemorate his benefits to the Roman Republic. This gesture, perfectly calculated, supports his desire to present himself as a moderate prince, preferring simplicity and restraint, in contrast to the perceived exuberance and excesses of Mark Antony and other generals. In a Rome where public opinion remained sensitive to demonstrations of traditional piety and humility, Augustus's communication was meticulous. It reflected his desire to emphasize the restoration of order and the respect for ancestral customs, also known as mos maiorum. Authors of the time, and even later historians, see in this anecdote further testimony of Augustus's skill in manipulating symbols. All of these events between 30 and 23 before Christ definitively established the birth of the Principate. At first glance, it is not an official monarchy, and Augustus did not receive the title of king, unlike the Hellenistic rulers. He did not proclaim himself dictator for life, an extreme solution that had earned Julius Caesar the mistrust of many senators. On the contrary, Augustus ensured that every institutional innovation appeared legitimate in the eyes of traditionalists. With his military victories and immense popularity with the people, He replaced the difficult balance of the republic, plagued by rivalries, with a peace under his authority. The Principate thus combines respect for republican appearances, as the Senate remains an assembly to which Augustus is accountable, and the real concentration of power, as he alone holds the military force, the military treasury, and the imperial administration. From the annexation of Alexandria and Egypt, now considered the personal property of the prince, to the symbolic closing of the Temple of Janus, from the accumulation of titles, including perpetual imperator, tribunicia potestas, and princeps senatus, to the adoption of the name Augustus, everything contributes to establishing Octavian in a unique and intangible status. Historians and contemporary populations will soon make him the central figure of a regime that will profoundly transform the Mediterranean world. The period from 30 to 23. Before Christ, short but decisive, is the foundation of an organization destined to last for centuries. The reformed institutions, while maintaining the illusion of continuity, allow Augustus to bring forth what will later be perceived as the first stable empire in Roman history. The military organization, a cornerstone of this longevity, ensures internal peace, while administrators, recruited from the equestrian class or the provincial elite, strengthen the central authority. In this logic, Augustus's prudence and attention to detail appear as the cardinal virtues of his success. Nothing is left to chance, and the control of Egyptian grain ensures the loyalty of the urban population of Rome, always on the lookout for public food distributions. The presence of the aerarium militare financially supports veterans who could, on their own, destabilize power by rebelling. Simultaneously, the staging of the prince's modesty, who refuses a gold shield and is content with a lesser-valued shield, reassures the Republican factions in the Senate. Those who fear a tyrannical drift are sometimes mistaken in their target, and Augustus does not need a crown to control the city. He relies on subtle mechanisms where everything goes through official honors, with a traditional appearance. The people of Rome, still marked by the recent memories of civil wars and political divisions, yearn for lasting peace. Augustus relies on an ambitious program of laws, administrative reforms, and monumental projects to shape Rome and its empire in the image of the order and virtue he wishes to embody. The first emblematic measure of this reformative era, known as Lex Julia and later as Lex Papia Poppaea, aims to restore the demographic vitality of the city. Augustus's assessment is clear since the number of citizens is declining, and the lack of descendants in many patrician families threatens the transmission of traditional values. Addressing the anxiety of seeing lineages die out, the Princeps offers legal incentives for marriage, procreation, and family life. According to these laws, men and women who conform to the Roman ideal of the household discover new privileges, such as tax advantages or easier access to certain public offices. Conversely, singles and widowers who delay remarriage face financial penalties or even restrictions on their ability to inherit. The objective is not only to increase the population, but also to moralize behaviors and consolidate the family structure, considered the cornerstone of Roman society. In the same vein, Augustus seeks to reinvigorate what he calls the mores maiorum, or the customs of the ancestors. The general perception is that, for several generations, civil and religious traditions have withered due to conflicts and social changes. Eager to perpetuate the virtuous example of the great Romans of the past, Augustus wishes to restore the piety, modesty, and discipline that, according to him, made the strength of the Republic. These principles materialize in the public sphere as well as in the private sphere, and the Roman elite is encouraged to reduce the excess of banquets and to favor greater sobriety in their clothing, while the plebeians are urged to respect traditional rights and cherish family. This revival of mores also takes the form of active promotion of the cult of Vesta and other archaic religious practices. Through these efforts, Augustus aims to reinforce a common identity, the cement of an empire now spread over several continents. Livia Drusilla, Augustus's wife since 38. Before Christ, plays an essential role in this moralizing enterprise. Daughter of the old nobility, she possesses the charisma necessary to embody the figure of the ideal matron. Respected for her restraint, fidelity, and measured elegance, Livia serves as a model for Roman women of all ranks. Through her subtle influence, she encourages modesty in feminine circles, wise management of the household, and careful education of children. Often represented in official statues, she participates in imperial propaganda that promotes the image of a united and exemplary princely family. Coins bearing her likeness, minted a little later, will highlight the prestige accorded to her. But even at this time, her presence reassures and inspires, while Augustus seeks to correct the excesses and abuses inherited from the end of the Republic. On the concrete level of urban administration, Rome itself undergoes a profound transformation. For centuries, the city has grown in often chaotic ways. To remedy this, Augustus establishes a division into 14 administrative regions, a layout designed to facilitate the management of daily affairs, tax collection, and the organization of public services. Each region is assigned magistrates or officials specifically responsible for security and maintenance. This reform breaks with previous chaos and affirms Augustus's desire to infuse new order into the largest metropolis of the Mediterranean world. In this Rome, which could reach 1 million inhabitants, including slaves and transient residents, such a division proves indispensable for efficiently distributing tasks, particularly concerning road maintenance, sewage removal, and the construction of public buildings. Among the most notable social measures is the creation of the vigils, who form both a corps of firefighters and a police force. This innovation results from a dramatic awareness. Fires regularly ravage the insulae, those crowded residential buildings found in overcrowded neighborhoods. When a fire breaks out, it spreads within hours, destroying entire blocks and causing countless victims. The vigils, initially recruited from among freedmen and organized into cohorts, are given the responsibility of ensuring nighttime safety, extinguishing fires, patrolling, and maintaining order in the streets. Their mission proves crucial in preventing disasters and preserving the tranquility of the city. In a context where population density increases dangers, the establishment of a specific public protection corps underscores the importance Augustus places on the well-being of his fellow citizens. Another essential device, the cura annoni, institutionalizes the distribution of grain to the urban plebs. This practice dates back to the end of the Republic, when successive leaders, aware of the political risk represented by hunger, organized the sale or donation of cereals at reduced prices. Augustus strives to perfect this supply system to avoid famines and riots. The precious shipments of wheat, mainly imported from Egypt and North Africa, arrive at Ostia or Puteoli before being transported to the warehouses of Rome. There, they are redistributed to a portion of the population, according to more or less subsidized modalities. Ensuring food supply is of strategic importance. Indeed, if the people are well fed and protected from shortages, they are more inclined to support the regime's authority or even to approve of the ambitious projects of their ruler. In parallel, Augustus launches a gigantic program of architectural constructions and renovations, symbolically reaffirming the power of the central government. His most masterful project, the Forum of Augustus, is erected not far from the traditional Roman Forum. This new public space, designed to facilitate judicial affairs and official ceremonies, constitutes a dazzling showcase of the new regime. A massive statue of Augustus stands next to the Temple of Mars Ultor, erected in honor of the avenging god of Rome's enemies. This solemn place, rich in marble and ornaments, embodies the alliance between divine majesty, military triumph, and political authority. Far from being just a backdrop, this forum, having become a high place of celebration, testifies to Augustus's desire to redefine the sacred topography of the city. A second symbolic edifice, the Ara Pacis Augustae, marks the consecration of the Pax Romana. Completed around the year 9th before Christ, this commemorative monument stands in the northern part of the Campus Martius. Entirely dedicated to peace, it celebrates the prosperity regained after civil unrest. Its bas-relief decor depicts processions of dignitaries, mythological scenes, and lush vegetal motifs, evoking a protected and fertile nature. For Augustus, the Ara Pacis acts as a visual proclamation of his close connection to the gods and as a commitment to maintaining the empire's equilibrium. The religious ceremonies held there, where sacrifices are offered to the deities to preserve peace, further cement the image of a pious princeps concerned for the common good. The creation of a mausoleum, erected on the left bank of the Tiber, underscores Augustus's desire to inscribe himself in the memory of the city for centuries to come. A massive circular mound covered with vegetation, this funerary monument is intended to house his ashes and those of his relatives. With this colossal structure, Augustus not only displays his intention to leave a monumental legacy to posterity, but also affirms a new form of dynasty, that of the Julio-Claudians. Inside, a familial cult is maintained, which, over time, will intertwine with the public veneration of the deified princeps. Visually impressive, the mausoleum also addresses a concern for propaganda. By presenting himself as a benefactor patriarch, Augustus strengthens the people's adherence while consolidating his supreme position. Among the most eloquent testimonies of this urban renewal is the first Pantheon, attributed to Agrippa, the friend and son-in-law of Augustus. Built around the year 27, it stands at the current location of the structure we know today, which was rebuilt much later under Hadrian. Yet, in it, one can see the beginnings of that sober architectural majesty characteristic of the Principate. Conceived as a sanctuary dedicated to all the gods, the Pantheon signifies the imperial power's desire to gather the divine within a single space, symbolizing the unity of Rome. The dome, still modest at this time, doesn't yet unfold the majesty we know today, but it lays the conceptual foundations of a circular space enlivened by zenithal light. By placing his name on the architrave, Agrippa closely associates his image with this prestigious achievement while highlighting his unwavering support for Augustus. The monumental rise far surpasses the historical heart of the city. All over Rome, new temples, monumental arches, judicial basilicas, and covered porticos are multiplying. The watchword is to gradually replace old wooden or brick structures with quality stone works. Aesthetic concern aligns with the desire to embellish the capital, making it a dazzling reflection of Roman power. This transformation aims to be successful on all fronts, as it promotes employment in the construction sector, flatters the citizens' pride, and inscribes the glory of Augustan rule in the powerful language of marble. The Italian quarries, notably those of Luna, today Carrara, are operating at full capacity to supply blocks of the finest quality. Even the blocks imported from Africa or Asia Minor testify to the cosmopolitan reach of the empire and the desire to unify all its territories under a single aesthetic banner. Among all these transformations, the phrase reported by the historian Suetonius, "I found Rome in bricks, I leave it to you in marble," is often retained as a striking summary of Augustus's impact. No matter if it overstates, it's true that the ancient city, under the Principate, dons a new splendor. The roads are safer, aqueducts multiply, and the sewers, including the famous Cloaca Maxima, better sanitize urban spaces. Certainly, Rome has not yet completely erased the traces of its chaotic republican past, nor remedied the glaring social inequalities. Nonetheless, the imprint of Augustus is felt everywhere, symbolizing the coherence and regained vitality of a state equipped with stable institutions and imposing architectural landmarks. The cumulative effect of these measures, whether in the family framework, public security, or urban planning, contributes to the emergence of an internal peace. The political circles, weary of wars and proscriptions, relish this calm. The population itself, relieved by the absence of new internal battles, enjoys the festivities organized to celebrate the Pax Augusta. Games, largesse, and ceremonies follow one another, reinforcing the regime's popularity. This does not mean that Augustus escapes all criticism, and some see in this moralistic enterprise an intrusion into private life, while others accuse the princeps of centralizing too much power in his hands. However, the majority of Romans, weary of chronic instability, welcome projects that provide them with material security and civic pride. The discreet but constant support of a group of close collaborators reinforces the impact of these reforms. Agrippa, a naval strategist and urban planner of genius, improves the water supply with additional aqueducts and supervises the construction of the Porticus of Neptune, celebrating his maritime victories. Maecenas, a man of letters and diplomatic advisor, encourages the promotion of the arts and the writing of poems, exalting the newfound peace while defending moral principles. Their coordinated action, under Augustus's watchful guidance, ensures rare coherence to a global policy touching both the sacred sphere and the daily lives of citizens. Artistic exhibitions, public readings, and religious ceremonies contribute to affirming a new cultural identity, where traditional virtues are reinterpreted to serve the imperial power's benefit. This foundation of internal stability reaches its pinnacle at the end of the first quarter of the century before our era. The Romans then enjoy the fruits of a vast undertaking of pacification, reform, and beautification. The matrimonial laws, those sources of debate, have significantly reinstated the meaning of family rights and encouraged birth rates. The accumulation of currency coming from the provinces, fueled by flourishing trade, allows for the financing of major works without excessively burdening the budget. The network of roads and administrative efficiency encourage the circulation of wealth and also of ideas. Stoic philosophers, priests, architects, and merchants cross paths in the capital, bearers of innovations and hopes. Through this internal colonization, Augustus forges the foundations of a prosperity that will mark the history of the empire for generations. It is true that this rigorous policy is not implemented without friction. Some aristocrats, attached to their freedom of morals, are reluctant to accept the constraints imposed by the Lex Julia and Papia Poppaea. In the western and eastern provinces, the strict requirements of Roman legislation, far removed from local traditions, are sometimes surprising. However, thanks to the policy of clemency and dialogue that Augustus continues with the elites of each conquered city, most end up adhering to the new model proposed. The abundant wealth, the protection of the Roman army, and the cultural aura of a city in full revival counterbalance the moral rigor that might displease some. Beyond the restrictions, Augustus never forgets the symbolic dimension of his role. In public ceremonies, he ostentatiously honors the gods, while presenting his actions as a reflection of their will. Official processions regularly pass through the new streets of the capital, linking the renovated temples, the Forum of Augustus, the Arapacis, and other vital points of this Rome in full transformation. In these lavish moments, senators, knights, the urban plebeians, and even foreign visitors look on, admiring a spectacle that exalts the grandeur of Roman power. Various ex votos, offering statues, and victory altars multiply in the city to thank the gods for their leniency and affirm the legitimacy of the princeps. Ultimately, the policy of internal stabilization and social reforms undertaken between 23 and 9 before Christ can be considered the cornerstone of the Augustan edifice. It allows Augustus to consolidate the base of his power and forge a new relationship between the princeps and his subjects. Under his impetus, the city acquires the appearance of an ordered imperial capital, proud and endowed with unprecedented scope. The Romans, on their side, benefit from new infrastructures, an embryonic social assistance system, and an ideological re-enchantment that magnifies their belonging to a glorious community. By unifying society around reformed values, offering a relative secularity that coexists with lively religious practices, and restoring the taste for civic virtue, Augustus indeed erects a new age in the history of the Eternal City. The foundations he lays during these crucial years will impact the destiny of Rome for decades and even centuries to come. The Pax Romana, established under Augustus's reign, starting from 27 before Christi, is often described as an unprecedented period of stability in the history of the Mediterranean world. However, this climate of peace is not achieved all at once. It is accompanied by vast military campaigns, diplomatic negotiations, and skillful management of alliances to expand and secure the borders of the Roman Empire. The conquered or integrated territories must be pacified, their roads developed, and their wealth exploited. The early years of Augustus's principate thus mark the beginning of a territorial reorganization and controlled expansion, whose main objective is to obtain lasting prosperity while reducing the risks of uprisings. For an international audience less familiar with this period, it is important to highlight that the Pax Romana results not from a mere peaceful intention, but from a carefully constructed balance between decisive military operations, political treaties, and the systematic use of Roman prestige to ensure the cooperation of local elites. In the west of the empire, in the Iberian Peninsula, the Romans still face, towards the end of the 1st century before Christ, tenacious pockets of resistance. For over a century, Rome has strived to conquer various local peoples, notably the Lusitanians, the Celtiberians, and the Cantabrians. The Cantabrians, settled in the mountainous regions of the north, put up fierce resistance, particularly due to their knowledge of the rugged terrain and their combat style suited to ambushes. Under the direct orders of Augustus, who even travels to Hispania during the campaign, the Roman legions eventually prevail. This war, sometimes called the Cantabrian War, mainly extends between 29 and 19 before Christ and represents the last phase of the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. For Rome, these victories are crucial. They allow the completion of the subjugation of the majority of Hispania and free up considerable military resources to consolidate other frontiers. After this harsh pacification, a significant integration effort is deployed. The local populations, although defeated, are called upon to collaborate in the economic development of the territories. One of the most striking examples of this policy is the exploitation of the Las Medulas gold mines, located in the Roman province of Hispania Tarraconensis, in the northwest of the peninsula. The Romans set up a sophisticated hydraulic extraction system there. They dig galleries in the rock, divert water courses to circulate large amounts of water, causing the controlled collapse of gold-bearing veins and the washing of sediments. This process, called ruina montium, which literally means ruin of the mountains, demonstrates Roman high technical skills and the desire to meticulously capitalize on annexed territories. The extracted gold is then transported to Rome, fueling coin minting and consolidating the economic power of the empire. At the same time, Augustus has to deal with another major power of the era, the Parthian Empire, established east of Mesopotamia, on territories corresponding to modern-day Iran, and largely controlling the Silk Road. Since the Roman defeat at Carrhae in 53 before Christ, during which Marcus Licinius Crassus was killed and Roman standards were seized, Rome has felt a sense of humiliation towards the Parthians. Obtaining the return of these standards becomes a major symbol for Roman pride. In 23 before Christ, Augustus sends a diplomatic delegation to Artaxata, a city situated within the Parthian sphere of influence, to negotiate an agreement with King Phraates IV. The Parthians agree to return the military standards confiscated at Carrhae, a gesture of high symbolic value that allows Augustus to celebrate a moral triumph without initiating a costly and perilous war in the east. Although Rome and the Parthian Empire do not maintain perfectly peaceful relations thereafter, the return of the standards bolsters Augustus's prestige and allows him to display his diplomatic success as a triumph equal to a military victory. During his reign, Augustus also ensures the security of the Alpine passes, essential for connecting the Italian peninsula to the provinces beyond the mountains, such as Gaul or the northern regions. The Alps constitute a significant geographical barrier, but also a hotbed of local uprisings and potential dangers for merchants. The Alpine tribes, taking advantage of their strategic position, often demand passage tolls or conduct raids against convoys. To counter these threats, Augustus multiplies expeditions and initiates a profound territorial reorganization. It is in this context that the Roman colony of Aosta, called Augusta Praetoria Salassorum, is founded around 25 before Christ in the Aosta Valley, a strategic region for crossing the Great St. Bernard and connecting to Gaul. The foundation of Aosta occurs after the submission of the local tribe of the Salassi. The Romans settle veterans of the legions in this outpost, accustomed to the cold and seasoned in the art of warfare in the mountains. They build a castrum, a military camp, that serves as the base for the future city. From Aosta, Roman engineers develop a network of roads that facilitate trade and communication to the northern provinces. Among these roads is the Via Julia Augusta, named after the gens Julia, the family of Augustus, which connects the Po Valley to the ports of Liguria and Narbonensis. Stone bridges are constructed, tunnels are dug, and slopes are softened to make the path more accessible. Over time, these infrastructures ensure that Rome gains increased control over transalpine commerce and the movement of troops, while promoting the Romanization of the populations. In the northeast of the empire, another theater of operations unfolds in Germania, the vast territory extending beyond the Rhine and north of the Alps. Under the direction of Augustus, campaigns led by two eminent generals, Drusus the Elder and Tiberius, Augustus's adoptive son, destined to play a leading role in the imperial apparatus, aimed to ward off the Germanic threat and control new spaces. At that time, the Germanic tribal confederations, such as the Sugambri, the Chatti, or the Sicambri, are formidable in the art of guerrilla warfare. The Roman project initially consists of advancing the frontier to the Elbe River, creating a natural defensive line easier to protect than the Rhine. Drusus, brother of Tiberius and son-in-law of Augustus, undertakes several expeditions from 12 before Christ aimed at subduing or rallying the Germanic tribes. He navigates the North Sea to bypass certain territories, then uses the rivers to penetrate the heart of the lands. The Roman legions, supported by auxiliaries recruited from the provinces, advance quite rapidly. Drusus's campaigns managed to establish a precarious balance between military occupation and negotiations with the tribal chiefs. In 11 before Christ, an important battle takes place along the Lupia, which is today the Lippe, in western Germany. Although ancient sources do not provide a perfectly detailed account of this confrontation, it is clear that Drusus and Tiberius achieve a sufficient victory to reinforce the Roman presence in the region. However, control of Germania remains challenging. The Romans quickly realize that maintaining garrisons beyond the Rhine entails immense costs and stirs continuous resentment among the local populations. The tribes regularly rise up, waiting for the opportune moment to strike a fatal blow to the legions. After the death of Drusus in 9 before Christ, Tiberius continues the military action, but the difficult terrain, the dispersion of allied or hostile tribes, and the harsh climate complicate the slow Roman progression. Augustus, from Rome, closely follows the situation, dividing his attention among several strategic regions. He understands that the Germanization of the empire could become one of the most complex steps of his principate, and he heavily relies on the skills of his generals to negotiate with local chiefs and impose his rule. The event, however, that completely changes the situation occurs in 9 Anno Domini. A coalition of Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a chief seeking to unify the different clans in a single surge of rebellion, lures the Roman legions into the Teutoburg forest in northern Germania. The Roman commander, Publius Quinctilius Varus, lacks caution, as he mistakenly believes the area is largely pacified and that the local tribes submit to Roman authority. Taking advantage of the densely wooded terrain and a carefully laid trap, Arminius deals Varus a crushing defeat. 3 entire legions, notably the 16th, 68th, and 19th, are annihilated, their legionary eagles lost, and most of the soldiers killed or captured. This disaster completely surprises Augustus and the Roman Senate. According to the accounts of the historian Suetonius, the emperor repeats for several days, "Var, rede mihi legiones," meaning Varus, give me back my legions. The dramatic significance of this defeat is immense. In addition to the collapse of the conquest plans in Germania, the loss of the legionary standards is a deep trauma for the army and for the image of Roman power. This tragedy counters the maintained idea of Rome's inexorable advance to the ends of the world. While the Pax Romana is not entirely called into question, it is severely shaken on this front. Augustus, now aware of the exorbitant cost of an occupation beyond the Rhine, puts an end to the large expansionist campaigns in Germania. From now on, the border will remain mostly fixed along the Rhine, with a few advanced Roman enclaves. On other fronts, however, Rome chooses a subtle policy of alliances and clientelism. This is particularly the case in the Orient, a vital area for the empire, notably due to its trade routes connecting Europe to Asia. The territories dominated by the Nabateans, located in the area corresponding to the south of present-day Jordan, and encompassing the ancient city of Petra, indeed play a crucial role in the circulation of incense, spices, and other luxury goods from Arabia and the Indian Peninsula. Instead of engaging in costly conflicts, Rome gradually integrates the Nabateans into its orbit by granting them semi-independence and recognizing their king, provided he acknowledges the superior authority of the emperor. The same principle applies to the Herodian kings in Judea, who exercised their power locally while remaining allied with Rome. The most famous of them is Herod the Great, renowned for his monumental construction projects, such as the renovation of the Temple of Jerusalem. Herod receives a form of guarantee from Augustus, and Rome protects his kingdom against external threats, while he serves as a relay for Roman influence in the region. Further west, in Cappadocia, a kingdom located in present-day central Turkey, client kings also benefit from Rome's goodwill in exchange for their loyalty. The central idea is to keep control over these pivotal territories without having to permanently deploy significant imperial troops. Rome avoids a direct war by multiplying diplomatic agreements, allowing Augustus to present himself at home as a pacifying sovereign, concerned about common prosperity. However, the Pax Romana extends not only through the sword or royal alliances, but also through the development of infrastructures that facilitate both civilian and military movement. The road network is one of the pillars of the empire, contributing both to the Romanization of the provinces and to the rapid circulation of information. The Roman roads, built to last, are constructed using elaborate techniques: stone paving, gutters for water drainage, regular milestones indicating distances. Among the major axes of the time, the Via Augusta, sometimes called the Via Julia Augusta to recall Augustus's lineage, allows one to follow the Mediterranean coast from Italy to Hispania, notably crossing the maritime Alps through routes punctuated by bridges and tunnels. This essential road links the flourishing ports and cities of Narbonensis in the south of Gaul to more western regions. Later, the Via Traiana, developed at the initiative of Emperor Trajan at the beginning of the 2nd century Anno Domini, extends the effort of Augustus and his successors to develop the viable network of the empire. Roman roads create a logistical link, allowing local producers to trade more easily, legions to move at record speed, and imperial officials to collect taxes or verify the proper application of laws. In the same perspective, Augustus significantly contributes to the establishment of the cursus publicus, an imperial postal service intended for official couriers, which complements and improves the arrangements already initiated during the late Republic. Thanks to relay stations set up along the main roads, messenger riders can quickly change mounts and thus cover considerable distances each day. The efficient functioning of this system ensures reliable information to the center of power, whether it concerns military reports, administrative orders, or diplomatic news. Thanks to the expansion supported by Roman roads and his measured policy of clientelism, Augustus managed to maintain key regions under control while avoiding the incessant conflicts that had marked the end of the Republic. Local princes enjoyed relative autonomy as long as they complied with Rome's fiscal and political demands. Thus, the empire could focus on securing its natural borders. To the north, the Rhine became a solid defensive barrier after the failure in Germania. To the east, although the Parthian question sometimes remained explosive, the Artaxata Agreement allowed both empires to avoid a prolonged direct confrontation. Moreover, the suppression of local revolts was facilitated by the roads and the cursus publicus, which allowed for the rapid mobilization of troops and the subjugation of potentially rebellious areas. It is nevertheless essential to understand that this peace was not uniform throughout the empire. Local populations faced new constraints, such as heavier taxes or the requisition of skilled workers for infrastructure projects like bridges, aqueducts, and amphitheaters decided by governors or by Rome. Legionaries settled in permanent camps, sometimes stayed for several years, profoundly altering the demographic composition of certain regions. Roman customs, the Latin language, and the imperial cult spread, encouraged by indigenous elites seeking to obtain Roman citizenship or profit from the new administrative system. For the entire empire, commercial growth and urbanization were factors of prosperity, but they were regularly accompanied by cultural tensions, population displacements, and challenges to ancestral traditions. Despite these difficulties, one can consider that between 27 before Christ and 9 Anno Domini, a nearly unprecedented balance was established. Major wars became less frequent in favor of more targeted campaigns. Revolts did not disappear but remained localized, quickly quelled by the intervention of seasoned Roman troops. Diplomatic pacts, particularly in the east, ensured relative tranquility on caravan routes. Annexed regions such as Hispania, Gaul, Egypt, or parts of the Balkans gradually reorganized to meet the capital's fiscal and military demands while accessing, unevenly, the prosperity linked to interprovincial trade. The legions learned from their mistakes to better consolidate the already acquired territories. Following the Teutoburg disaster, Augustus and his advisors clearly perceived the danger of attempting to quickly integrate regions with deeply rooted warrior traditions. Thus, they officially abandoned the advance to the Elbe, which had been a central objective of previous campaigns led by Drusus and Tiberius. Instead, they fortified the left bank of the Rhine, constructing powerfully defended legion camps, such as those at Mogontiacum or Vetera. This defensive strategy highlighted a new principle. It was better to consolidate a stable border than to conquer new, difficult-to-control territories. In this context, Augustus's portrayal as the pacifier of the world fully integrated with his propaganda. Henceforth, he no longer needed spectacular grand conquests to assert his legitimacy. The essential thing was maintaining peace and prosperity within the empire. The walls of Rome were adorned with monuments celebrating prosperity and the return to tranquility after the long civil wars that had exhausted the Republic. The provinces, for their part, recognized the economic benefit of a Roman order that encouraged the flow of goods and the settlement of colonists, even if tax pressure remained a permanent concern. During the reign of Augustus, culture and the arts became fundamental vectors of political communication. In this period, characterized by the transition from a crisis-driven republican regime to an unprecedented form of personal power, a cultural program of unprecedented scope emerged. This program served as propaganda for the new order established by Augustus, while nourishing literary and artistic production. In a Rome undergoing political transformation, the promotion of a common identity, the exaltation of regained peace, and the claim of continuity with republican traditions intertwined to shape a highly elaborate official discourse. Culture thus became an arm of domestic and foreign diplomacy, aiming to illustrate the grandeur of Rome, justify the dominant position of the emperor, and, above all, bring the population together around revitalized common values. To support this policy, Augustus relied notably on a circle of talented friends and supporters, among whom was Gaius Silnius Maecenas, often known in French as Mécène. Maecenas, from an influential equestrian family, distinguished himself through his skills in advising the power and encouraging the flourishing of literary works. Indeed, his residence on the Esquiline, one of Rome's 7 hills, became an intellectual salon where promising young poets converged. It is in this setting that Virgil, whose real name is Publius Virgilius Maro, Horace, known as Quintus Horatius Flaccus, and Propertius, whose full name is Sextus Propertius, found financial protection, a fruitful discussion framework, and a promise of swift recognition. Maecenas inherited an implicit mission to shape, through support to these writers, the elements of an ideological narrative that reinforced Augustus's authority, celebrating the new era. Writers were thus encouraged, or subtly guided, to emphasize the civilizing mission and divine heritage of the Roman people. Among these authors, Virgil occupied a central place, born in 70 before Christ and died in 19th before Christ. He is the author of the Aeneid, an epic that became a pillar of Latin literature. In this long poem, Virgil recounts the fate of the Trojan hero Aeneas, fleeing the fall of Troy and seeking a new home in Italy. The epic concludes with the idea that the Romans descended from Aeneas, establishing a legendary link between Greek mythology and the foundations of Rome. This narrative, strongly supported by Augustus, serves to legitimize Roman supremacy, described as a divine mandate guaranteeing order and peace on earth. The figure of Aeneas, symbolizing filial piety and courage, offers a moral model to the Roman people. This work, written in the context of the victory at Actium and Augustus's rise to power, presents in the background a glorification of the nascent dynasty, while celebrating Rome as a guardian of a superior civilization, destined to unite the West and the East under the yoke of the Pax Romana. On Horace's side, it is mainly the odes and the apodes that illustrate the spirit of the era. Horace, a former soldier engaged on Brutus's side before joining Augustus, employs various lyrical forms in his poems, often inspired by the Greek model. His works reflect both the pleasure of banquets and the Epicurean nature of daily life, and the exaltation of peace restored after long civil wars. In some odes, Horace depicts Augustus as a protector of the arts, a restorer of order, and a guarantor of economic prosperity. In doing so, he conveys a message of recognition and loyalty towards the new sovereign. Readers and listeners of these poems, as at the time poetry was often recited, quickly understood the subtext. Indeed, Rome must submit to Augustus's wisdom for everyone to live happily and safely. As for Perpetuus, he stands out for his elegiac poetry, which sings of love and personal feelings, but also subtly references Roman greatness, the mythical origins of the city, and the ideological program of the new era. This literary effervescence goes hand in hand with a major architectural renewal. Augustus wishes to make Rome the visible reflection of his power and reforms. Architecture and urban planning become instruments of propaganda just like literature. The Corinthian style, already used during the Republic, is enriched under Augustus with innovations from Hellenized provinces and Roman experimentation. In some buildings, such as the Forum of Augustus or the Temple of Mars Ultor, we notice the appearance of a composite order which combines Ionic and Corinthian elements to manifest an unprecedented refinement. This architectural hybridization well illustrates the Roman ambition to marry tradition and adaptation. In fact, Rome borrows forms from the Greek world to recreate them in its own way, emphasizing both the cultural conquest of Greece and the desire to surpass ancient models. In parallel, construction techniques are perfected. The use of pozzolana concrete, a mortar containing lime and volcanic ash, revolutionizes the design of domes and vaults. This technical innovation, already experimented with under the Republic, reaches a remarkable degree of mastery under Augustus, allowing the creation of vast and sturdily built interior spaces. This evolution will have profound repercussions on Roman monumentality, found in constructions such as the original Pantheon of Agrippa before its later reconstruction under Hadrian, and in the gradual reshaping of forums. Pozzolana concrete has the immense advantage of being less costly than cut stone, while allowing ambitious architectural achievements such as porticos, domes, and amphitheaters revolutionary for the time. In the extension of this monumental policy, Urban planning throughout the empire is marked by construction projects of temples dedicated to the glory of Augustus. With the establishment of a nascent imperial cult, not only the city of Rome and its traditional deities are celebrated, but also the power or genius of the emperor. The cult of Genius Augusti, that is to say, the protective spirit personifying Augustus, spreads throughout the provinces. Local authorities erect places of gathering, sanctuaries, or altars to honor this new religious foundation. In Nimes, in the south of Gaul, today in France, a majestic temple dedicated to Augustus. Often called the Maison Carrée in its later state, this temple embodies both the adoption of Roman aesthetics and the birth of provincial loyalty. Likewise, in Pergamon, a city in Asia Minor in present-day Turkey, a sanctuary dedicated to Augustus in Rome is built to consolidate the link between the central government and local elites. This expansion of the imperial cult reinforces political cohesion and reminds that Roman peace is conceived under Augustus's unique authority. The rise of the imperial cult and the reaffirmed attachment to divine models inherited from mythology also transpire in official iconography. The famous statue of Augustus of Prima Porta, discovered in the Villa of Livia, wonderfully illustrates this mix of heroic reference and imperial staging. Dated around 20 before Christ, it represents the emperor in military attire, the cuirass finely decorated, highlighting the restitution of Roman standards by the Parthians in that same year. This is a highly symbolic event. The legion's standards lost after the disastrous Battle of Carrhae in 53. Before Christ, until then, had constituted a humiliation for Rome. By this restitution, Augustus displays his diplomatic capacity and authority towards Eastern powers. The statue itself is connected to the Greek ideal of statuary canon, while adding Roman symbols, notably a tiny Cupid, a representation of love, and for the Julian dynasty, a reminder of the supposed descent from Aeneas and Venus, riding a dolphin at the feet of the emperor, suggesting the divine protection Augustus enjoys. The reliefs of the cuirass feature divine and allegorical figures, such as personifications of sky and earth, reinforcing the idea that the cosmic order supports the emperor. Beyond the imperial iconography showcased through statuary, currency also plays a leading role in spreading the propagandist message. The effigies of Augustus struck on denarii and aurae, that is, gold coins, accompanied by Latin legends praising the pax, or the title of imperator, circulate throughout the empire from Britain to Syria. Local populations, sometimes very distant from power, thus discover an idealized portrait of the emperor, whose serene expression and classical hairstyle betray the desire to associate him with divine perfection. One could say, anachronistically, that it is almost like a constant advertising campaign, visible in the daily life of every citizen, merchant, or soldier. This staging of power, while expressed through sculpture and currency, can also be found in grand public spectacles. The Romans of the time enjoy entertainment, and Augustus understood this well. In order to consolidate his popularity and show that he contributes to the well-being of the plebeians, he restored or built several venues for entertainment. One of the emblematic achievements is the inauguration of the Theater of Marcellus, around 13 or 11 before Christ, whose completion is attributed to Augustus in homage to his late nephew, Marcus Claudius Marcellus, who died in 23 before Christ. Built in stone, this theater can accommodate several thousand spectators and offers a new venue for the pleasures of comedies, mimes, and tragic plays. Situated near the Tiber, not far from the Portico of Octavia, it is part of a monumental ensemble enhancing the splendor of the regime. Moreover, naumachia are among the most fascinating spectacles of the Augustan era. A naumachia is the reenactment of a naval battle in a basin or on a diverted body of water. According to some accounts, Augustus had an artificial basin constructed, sometimes attributed to the Lake of Nero later on, in order to maneuver reconstructed galleys to restage famous battles or illustrate ancient myths. These spectacles draw considerable crowds, eager for thrills, and curious to see real combat displays. Additionally, these reenactments symbolize Roman mastery of the seas, an essential element of military and commercial control in the Mediterranean basin. By offering increasingly spectacular games, Augustus strengthens his relationship with the citizens and reinforces the idea that he is the guarantor of stability and prosperity. This entire system of celebration and illustration of imperial power culminates in official ceremonies and anniversaries. One of the notable moments remains the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Actium, a founding victory in Augustus's rise to power. Even though the precise dating can vary according to ancient calculation methods, where decades or triumphs are sometimes commemorated at staggered times, it is reported that on this occasion, a distribution of 60 denarii was granted to each Roman citizen. In a society where the denarius represents a decent day's wage for a soldier or a worker, receiving 60 silver coins is a significant gesture, equivalent to several months of income for the most modest. This gift resonates considerably in the streets of Rome and beyond. In practice, it signifies the emperor's generosity and recalls the foundational role of Actium in the current peace. Far from being a purely philanthropic act, this distribution tightens the client-patron ties between Augustus and his subjects. By thanking the emperor for his magnanimity, the Romans reinforced the consensus around his power. This material support for the population, combined with the exaltation of the gods and prestigious ancestors, testifies to the symbiosis between Augustus's political ambitions and cultural expression. Maecenas and the poets ensure the creation of an ideological framework where the glory of Rome and the emperor's authority are justified by history, mythology, and traditional morals. Builders and urban planners transform this ideal on the ground, adorning the capital and cities of the empire with edifices intended to impress inhabitants and travelers. Priests and local notables introduce and develop the cult of the genius of Augustus, spreading the idea that divine protection now hovers over the empire. Sculptors, coin engravers, and public festival organizers complete the system by making every event, every coin, every statue a reminder that is difficult to escape. In this apparent harmony, culture, religion, urbanism, and architecture form a coherent whole in the service of the regime. Admittedly, there is a desire to give the population panem et circenses, bread and circuses, but beyond that, the Pax Romana also aims to be a Pax Augusta. Rome is no longer just the republic that had conquered the Mediterranean. It now presents itself as the benevolent protector of a vast world, bringing peace, order, prosperity, and beauty. The emperor stands at the center of this ensemble, not as a de facto tyrant, but as the first citizen invested with a sacred mission. The richness of cultural production under Augustus is also reflected in the widespread patronage, not only around Maecenas, but also with other close associates of Augustus, such as Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa or Caius Silnius Proculus, who is from the same family as Maecenas. Secondary literary circles, free from direct official ties, develop, showing that the creative momentum launched by the power has stimulated a real enthusiasm for writing and the arts. In some regions of the empire, local schools of sculpture emerge, inspired by Italic and Greek currents, but seeking to innovate to meet the tastes of the Roman administration and local elites. The works thus produced, especially steles, busts, and funerary reliefs, often feature the image of Augustus or his close associates. Subsequently, this tradition of official art carrying a political message would continue with Augustus's successors. But at the time in question, the decades around the birth of the Principate, the city of Rome is already filled with new buildings, and the Roman aristocracy, once so reluctant to monarchy, gradually gets used to the image of a prince who defines himself as the restorer of the republic while modifying its foundations. Augustus's encouragement of letters, architecture, religion, and public celebrations results in rooting his power. The ideology of Roman greatness, now codified by sumptuous achievements, spreads to the edges of the Mediterranean world. Through these multiple dimensions, namely literature, architecture, religion, iconography, and games, Augustus's propaganda reaches an unprecedented level of sophistication for the time. It is embodied in acclaimed poetic texts, engraved in the stones of temples that line the roads of the empire, and expressed in lavish celebrations to the glory of the prince. In many ways, this system of regime promotion through culture constitutes a pioneering model that will be found in the form of imitations or adaptations in later imperial courts, whether it is the immediately following Julio-Claudian dynasty or foreign rulers fascinated by the Roman capacity to legitimize its power through the arts. Between 12 and 14, several deaths, exiles, and adoptions came to disrupt the already fragile balance of the imperial family. For an international audience not necessarily familiar with Roman history, it is essential to determine who the protagonists were, why these events had such an impact, and how they shaped the continuation of Augustus's reign. The dramas that unfolded then indeed illuminate the transition between the foundation of the Principate, the regime established by Augustus, and the accession to power of his successor, Tiberius. Through unexpected deaths, family intrigues, and meticulously orchestrated political maneuvers, the fragile institutional structure built by Augustus was put to the test, threatened to waver before pulling itself together to ensure the continuity of the dynasty. The first significant tragedy of this period occurred in 9 before Christ E, when Drusus, one of the most esteemed members of the imperial family, lost his life. Born as Nero Claudius Drusus, and often referred to as Drusus the Elder, this Roman general was the son of Livia Drusilla, the wife of Augustus, and the younger brother of Tiberius. Drusus was highly regarded by both the people and the army. His military aura, reinforced by his campaigns in Germania, made him a figure worthy of admiration. He distinguished himself through his bravery and ability to rally troops. His death, following a fall from his horse during an expedition, caused considerable dismay. The Romans, accustomed to seeing him as a young and energetic officer, became acutely aware of human fragility at the state's summit. Drusus's funeral provided Augustus the opportunity to emphasize the solidarity of the imperial family and highlight the continuity of its military values. However, this event already cast a shadow of uncertainty over the issue of male heirs. The deceased prince left behind offspring too young to claim a position of prime importance in the imperial hierarchy, reinforcing the idea that dynastic stability had to be assured otherwise. In addition to the death of Drusus, a few years later came the scandal involving Julia the Elder. Julia, the only daughter of Augustus and his former wife Scribonia, had been, for political reasons, married several times to key figures of the regime to strengthen alliances. However, in sex, before Christi, Julia found herself at the center of an adultery scandal. In Roman morality, already challenged by Augustus's desire to reform social mores and promote exemplary conduct within high society, accusations of infidelity carried particular gravity. Julia was supposed to embody virtue and serve as a model of behavior for Roman aristocratic women. Her direct kinship with Augustus further highlighted the inconsistency between her status and the fault she was accused of. This affair caused considerable shock in the city and forced Augustus, concerned with preserving the image of his regime, to make a drastic decision for the time. He exiled his own daughter. Contrary to harsher punitive practices, relegation to a remote place from Rome, the island of Panditaria, now Ventotene, in Italy, was already a sign of exceptional firmness, considering the familial ties involved. In the eyes of the public, this measure demonstrated that Augustus, as Rome's foremost magistrate, placed himself above any willingness to overlook misdeeds, and that even his closest relatives were not exempt from the morality he wished to impose. This scandal surrounding Julia also impacted the regime's matrimonial politics, as Julia was a pivotal figure in the alliances formed by Augustus. Her marriage to Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, Augustus's loyal lieutenant, produced two sons, Gaius Caesar and Lucius Caesar, destined to play crucial roles in the lineage. Paradoxically, while Julia was denounced for her allegedly irresponsible conduct, her children were perceived as the promise of a stable future for the empire. After Agrippa's death in 1282, before Christ's age, Augustus sought to secure the future by formally adopting Gaius and Lucius, thus granting them a prominent place in the institutional order. They became Caesars, bearing the dynasty's hopes. This adoption process was a common practice among high-ranking Romans, especially when the direct heir was missing or deemed unsuitable. Thus, Gaius and Lucius, although biologically grandsons of Augustus, were officially elevated to the rank of adoptive sons, bolstering their legitimacy in the context of imperial succession. Yet fate took a cruel turn. Gaius died in Suda CE while in the Orient, perhaps weakened by a wound or illness contracted during a military expedition. As for Lucius, he passed away in 4 CE in Massalia, today's Marseille, under circumstances likely related to a sudden illness, completely thwarting the linear power transfer plans Augustus had strived to establish. Losing, within a few years, 2 carefully groomed heirs cast a shadow over the hopes for a harmonious succession. The Romans, long accustomed to political life's uncertainties, saw this as a bad omen for the empire's stability. Augustus, already tested by Drusus's death and Julia's scandal, found himself compelled to make a new strategic turn regarding the designation of his future successor. He then turned towards Tiberius, the eldest son of Livia, and thus brother to Drusus, whose military and political career was already well advanced. Tiberius had nevertheless gone through difficult years, notably due to a voluntary exile in Rhodes. The exact motivations for this retreat remain a subject of debate among historians. Some suggest that Tiberius, having been sidelined from the line of succession by the promotion of Gaius and Lucius, might have preferred to withdraw from public life to avoid court conflicts. Others believe that his relationship with Augustus and the position he occupied in power games had become too ambiguous. In any case, the premature deaths of Gaius and Lucius prompted Augustus to recall Tiberius in Anno Domini II. However, it took until Anno Domini IV for Augustus to officially designate Tiberius as heir by adopting him. This adoption was not a trivial act. It legally established Tiberius as the son of Augustus and transformed his political position by placing him in the first circle of succession, which decisively changed the balance of power within the imperial family. In this reorganization, another family member raised concerns for Augustus, Agrippa Posthumus, born in 12. Before Christ, he was known as Posthumus because he was born shortly after the death of his father, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. As the son of Julia the Elder, and thus Augustus's biological grandson, He could also have claimed a high rank in the dynasty. However, ancient sources depict Agrippa Posthumus as an unstable and violent young man, likely to disrupt the harmony necessary for the smooth functioning of power. Despite historical uncertainties and the lack of direct testimonies, it seems clear that Augustus had little trust in this grandson. Shortly after his mother Julia's exile, Agrippa Posthumus began to display behaviors deemed unacceptable for a prospective heir to power. Perhaps there was a fear that his uncontrollable fervor would lead him to attempt to supplant Tiberius or to rally to potential dissident factions. To prevent a potential new conflict from erupting within the family, Augustus decided to distance him and impose strict surveillance. For a contemporary audience unfamiliar with these practices, it's important to remember that exile or sidelining of an imperial family member was nothing exceptional in ancient Rome, especially when aimed at preventing plots or internal schisms. Tiberius's position, increasingly indisputable, was reinforced in Anno Domini 13, when Augustus instituted a sharing of the tribunicia potestas, that is, the tribunician power. In the Roman system, this prerogative was fundamental, granting the ability to convene the Senate, oppose certain political decisions, and especially propose laws. Inherited from the traditional rights of the tribunes of the plebs, this authority provided a protective role to its holder, allowing him to theoretically defend the people's interests against potential injustices. By delegating a portion of this power to Tiberius, Augustus fully associated him with the supreme authority as a partner in governance. This move constituted a nearly explicit announcement of succession. The Roman people, the Senate, and all provincial elites were henceforth to prepare to recognize Tiberius as the legitimate successor. In the shadow of these political maneuvers, Augustus, aware of the precariousness of his health and the time that was starting to weigh on his shoulders, dedicated himself to writing a document that would remain the official testimony of all his accomplishments, notably the Res Gestae Divi Augusti. This text, whose title literally means the deeds accomplished by the divine Augustus, aimed to engrave in stone the detailed list of the princeps' great deeds. Intended for future generations, it was a real propaganda operation, as Augustus recorded in it his military victories, political reforms, expenditures for the city, generosity towards the people, and everything that, in his eyes, justified the perpetuation of his legacy. The fact that he undertook this writing in the last years of his life speaks volumes about his concern for posterity and his desire to control collective memory. Several copies of this document were sent to the provinces and engraved on public monuments, such as in Ankara, now Ankara in Turkey, where the most complete version, called Monumentum Ancyrinum, remains an invaluable source for modern historians. To put matters into context, it is important to emphasize how these family crises were much more than simple private conflicts. In the Roman mindset, the harmony of the domus, meaning of the household, often reflected the health of the entire regime. Indeed, Augustus, as the first emperor, embodied the new form of power that succeeded the Republic, and his family was perceived as the pillar of a political edifice still in the process of consolidation. The Romans, accustomed to the instability brought by civil wars, longed for enduring stability. However, each premature death, like those of Drusus, Caius, and Lucius, or each scandal, like the exile of Julia, rekindled fears of a return to discord. Augustus's choice to favor a more experienced heir, Tiberius, demonstrated his pragmatism. Despite Tiberius being sometimes considered austere and lacking the popularity of Drusus, or the freshness of Caius and Lucius, he represented a battle-hardened military figure and a competent administrator. From then on, Augustus's priority was to ensure that, when the time came, Tiberius would be able to take on the task of leading the empire without shaking the established authority. The sharing of the tribunicia potestas illustrated this willingness, and Augustus worked to prepare his successor for the supreme responsibilities while proving to the elite that there would be no power vacuum. This meticulous attention to organizing his succession was also reflected in his attitude toward other family members. By keeping Agrippa Postumus at bay, the princeps ensured that no one would challenge Tiberius's legitimacy. It is true that the method could seem harsh, as exiling a grandson meant breaking a family bond, but this measure was necessary in the Roman political environment, where even the slightest weakness could spark a conspiracy or rebellion. In fact, from Augustus's point of view, time was of the essence. After the loss of Drusus, Julius Caesar had provided a precedent of an adoptive succession that relied on recognized talents. This approach had proven effective multiple times in Roman history. At the dawn of Augustus's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty remained fragile. The disappearance of the younger heirs had destroyed the hope of a spontaneous transmission, based on a charismatic figure young enough to prolong the golden age that the people believed they were witnessing under the Augustan peace. However, by rationally organizing the succession, Augustus managed to reassure both the population and the Senate. The power was carefully delineated, and no serious contender could challenge Tiberius's rise. The inscription of the Res Gestae stone beautifully illustrates the idea that Augustus was concerned with his image and legacy until the very end. In it, he recounted, point by point, the gifts he had given to the people, the honors bestowed upon him, and the monuments he had erected. His goal was twofold. On one hand, to demonstrate the legitimacy of his regime by highlighting his merits. On the other, to give everyone the impression that the Rome he was leaving behind was solid, prosperous, and ready to be entrusted to an heir capable of continuing his work. This staging of posterity was in line with the moral requirement Augustus had always set for himself, notably demonstrating that the Principate was not a dictatorship, but the natural continuation of a republic built on newly renewed foundations. In this aspect, the place of the family remained essential, and without a viable succession, the entire structure risked collapsing and plunging Rome back into chaos. Thus, the period from 12 before Christ to Anno Domini 14 illustrates the tension between the republican ideal of collegial leadership and the reality of an urgent need for stability embodied by a single ruler. The family crises resulted in a series of complicated decisions for Augustus, such as punishing his beloved daughter for adultery, admitting the failure of a carefully planned succession with Caius and Lucius, accepting an adoptive son he had once kept at a distance, and keeping at arm's length a too uncontrollable grandson. Each of these actions highlighted the fragility of a system where the emperor was, in practice, invested with most of the powers, and where family rivalries could have significant repercussions on the public sphere. In the end, these decisive years brought Tiberius closer to the position he would occupy upon Augustus's death in 14 Anno Domini. Political maneuvers, successive adoptions, and the staging of the Augustan legacy gradually transformed the perception of Livia's son, previously seen as a choice by default, into the most reasonable solution to ensure the empire's continuity. Tiberius's supporters and his partisans in the Senate were able to justify this position with facts, notably military discipline, administrative experience, Augustus's desire to involve him in power, and finally, the gradual acceptance by the Roman people. As for Augustus, one might think he experienced these upheavals with ambivalent feelings. On the one hand, the satisfaction of settling the future of Rome, on the other, the regret of the many tragedies that had befallen his close ones. It is indeed in these circumstances, filled with pragmatism and emotion, that the last decade of his reign unfolded, as he oversaw both the administration of a vast empire and the meticulous orchestration of the transfer of his authority.